I read Stormy Daniels' testimony in Donald Trump's New York criminal trial so that you don't have to. I assume that if you're here, you know who Stormy Daniels is, but if you don't, she is a director, writer, and actress in the adult film industry and sometimes the regular film industry as well. Before we start, I should say that this has to be like the most contested witness that has come up so far. The defense tries several times to object to her appearing at all, then to object to her talking about her feelings. There's like endless debate about all of this. So once she's up on the stand, the prosecution starts off by like letting us get to know her a little bit as a human being. She grew up in Louisiana. She attended Catholic school, danced with the Baton Rouge Ballet Academy, ultimately entered the magnet school system where she attended an engineering school because she wanted to get a scholarship. She thought engineering would be good for getting a scholarship to become a veterinarian. When she was 17, a friend of hers said that she wanted to take her to her dance club. Stormy thought it was going to be sort of like ballet dance. It was not. The club didn't ID, and Stormy started working there on the weekends. She was accepted into Texas A&M University and did get a scholarship, but said that she took a year off because she was going to need to save money to pay for all the expenses that a scholarship doesn't cover, and ended up never going back to school. While she's working as a dancer, she realizes that there's a series of like traveling headliners who get paid more because they have special skills and special credits, and she realizes that she'll make more money if she's got credits in magazines and movies, and so she starts posing for adult magazines around the age of 21. At the age of 23, she moves to California and signs with Wicked Pictures, where she starts performing in and ultimately writing and directing adult movies. Throughout the course of her career, she has performed in 200 films and directed 150 films, winning 11 different awards as a director. She has also appeared in mainstream movies, TV, and music videos. In July of 2006, Stormy is still with Wicked Pictures. She's 27 and she's at a celebrity golf tournament because Wicked Pictures is sponsoring one of the holes. While she's working the event, Stormy meets Donald Trump on the golf course, and then later that night in a gifting suite where she gives him 3 Wishes, which is a movie that she's written, directed, and starred in. At the event, Keith Schiller, Donald Trump's bodyguard, tells Stormy that Mr. Trump would like to invite her to dinner that night. Her initial reaction is no, but then her publicist thinks it might be a good idea, and also she's annoyed with a bunch of the girls who she's supposed to go out to dinner with that night, so she decides ultimately to accept. That night, Stormy goes to Mr. Trump's hotel room. She gets there, and Keith Schiller, the bodyguard, is standing outside of this massive penthouse suite. The prosecution then has her go through a bunch of the details of the suite itself. She focuses a lot on that it's like nicer than anywhere she or her friends have ever lived. I think right away establishing that there's like a pretty massive power imbalance. Don't forget, Donald Trump at this time is about 60, about twice her age. Donald Trump is in the penthouse suite waiting for her and wearing a full pajama set. She says to him, "Does Hefner know you stole his pajamas?" But also she's there to talk business. Her publicist said she should go, so she tells Mr. Trump that she'd prefer if he put clothes on. And he does. And then he says that it's a little early, so before they go down to dinner or order something in or whatever, would she mind just going and sitting at the dining room table with him for a while? It becomes a big point that they never eat dinner. He asks her about her industry, about her aspirations, about her childhood. She asks him about Melania. He says that doesn't really matter. They don't even sleep in the same bedroom anymore. It shouldn't matter anyway because she thinks they're there for a business meeting, but obviously that's not what he thinks they're there for. She says that as they're talking, he's rude. He keeps cutting her off. At one point, he cuts her off to ask if she wants to see the cover of Trump magazine that he's been working on, and she says that the only reason that she'd want to have the magazine is to spank him with it, so he rolls it up, offers it to her, and she does. Around this point, court takes a break, and the judge tells Trump's lawyers to tell him that he has to stop audibly swearing and visibly shaking his head during Stormy's testimony. While they're at the dining room table having this long dinnerless conversation, Mr. Trump implies that she, Stormy, would make a great contestant on The Apprentice. She says there's no way the network would let that happen considering the industry that she's in. He's like, "I'm pretty powerful. I think I could make it happen." She's like, I don't really know anything about business. I don't think I'd do well on that show. He says, "Well, what if I told you about the challenges ahead of time?" They're not drinking alcohol. Stormy never claims that she's inebriated in any way. I think it's actually important to remember that overall, she doesn't claim that she was assaulted. Period. This isn't a case about assault. This is a case about falsified business records. They are drinking a lot of water, so Stormy asks where she can use the restroom, and Trump directs her to the master bath, which she has to walk through his bedroom to get to. Interesting because in a suite of the size that she described, there's definitely like a little powder room that she could hop into. While she's in the bathroom, Stormy is considering the fact that she still hasn't had dinner, even though she was invited over for dinner, so she's thinking, I'm gonna head back out and make an exit. But when she leaves the bathroom, Mr. Trump is on the bed in boxers and a t-shirt. At this point, she says that her head starts spinning. She's panicking. She says she wants to leave. Mr. Trump stands up. He says, what a shame that she wants to leave. He really thought they were getting somewhere and he could help her out of the trailer park. She says this is offensive. She's never lived in a trailer park. At this point, she says she blacks out and doesn't realize what's happening until she's on the bed underneath him. The defense is really upset that she's described the position. She says she remembers very little of this part, but does remember staring at the ceiling, does remember that he doesn't wear protection, and that she was worried about that. As soon as they're done, Stormy starts getting dressed. She's trying to make as quick of an exit as she possibly can. And as she's putting herself together, apparently Trump is calling her honey bun, saying that they had a great experience together. Hopefully they can do it again. They should definitely try and get her on The Apprentice. Like, he's had a good night. And now Stormy's getting back to her regular life. And at this point, Donald Trump is calling her, she says, about once a week. And it's essentially more talk about how maybe he could get her on The Apprentice, and wouldn't it be nice if they could hang out again sometime. In March of 2007, she's in New York. He invites her to Trump Tower, says he just wants to see her. Not much happens there, except for that he still implies that he's working on The Apprentice thing. She sees him one more time in 2007 in California. He still says he's working on The Apprentice thing. Eventually he calls and is like, look, I don't think I can get you on The Apprentice. I think he blames it on like one of the executive's wives being too prude, but she kind of stops answering his calls at this point. She says the final conversation they had was a phone call later in 2007 because Jenna Jameson, another adult entertainer, appears on The Apprentice doing like a cameo. She's not a contestant, but her husband is. Trump thinks Stormy will be offended, calls to apologize, and she's like, at that point, I really didn't care. In 2011, In Touch magazine, they reach out to Stormy Daniels. They say they're gonna run a story about her affair with Trump. She initially doesn't want to do the interview, but they're gonna run the story anyway. So she gets on the phone for like a 15-minute phone call. They say that if the story runs, when the story runs, they'll pay her $15,000 for it. The story at the time does not run. But this is the point, 2011, when thedirty.com does run a story about her situation with Donald Trump. And Gina Rodriguez, her manager, gets in touch with Keith Davidson, who ends up having the story taken down, and now he's sort of Stormy's lawyer in the future. In 2011, in relation to all these stories, is also when Stormy Daniels says that she was threatened outside of a Mommy and Me workout class and told that she had better not tell her story about Donald Trump or else something would happen to her and her child. And now it's 2015. Donald Trump is running for president, and Gina Rodriguez, Stormy Daniels' manager, thinks that it's time they sell her story. Stormy Daniels says that she's like into the idea, not primarily for the money, but because she thinks she'll be safer if it's public. Like, the entire idea is that she can hide in the open. Like, he's not going to be able to threaten her if everybody knows that they're attached and if there's paperwork backing that up. And now it's October of 2016. And as we all know from all the many witnesses, the Access Hollywood tape drops. Interest in the story through the roof, and Stormy learns that Michael Cohen is interested in buying the piece for Donald Trump. She thinks that's great. That means that she can create this paper trail that will ideally keep her safe, and also she doesn't have to go public with her story, which she doesn't really want to do. She's not all that interested in this particular type of media attention, and she doesn't want to have to explain everything to her husband, who she's not kept in the loop about all of this. She doesn't negotiate the $130,000 offer. She says that it's really not about the money. She's doing well, and it's mostly about her safety. And as a note, of the $130,000, I think she keeps $96,000 of it, which I think we've got 10 to Keith Davidson and 24, that means, to Gina Rodriguez. The prosecution talks her through the process of signing the initial NDA. I think that's like October 10th. She's supposed to be paid October 14th. She isn't paid by October 14th. The prosecution asks her why that is, and she says everyone was making excuses. The prosecution asks her who was making the excuses, and she says Michael Cohen to Keith Davidson because of Trump to Cohen and Cohen to Davidson. Then there's the whole like calling off of the deal and resetting the deal, and she signs another NDA, but it's essentially the same NDA on October 28th of 2016, and that becomes the official document. And after that, Stormy says that she has the best year of her life in 2017. She's making the most money that she's ever made. She's directing, she's writing, she's living in like a suburban neighborhood where her neighbors don't really know who she is. Things are going well. Then on January 10th of 2018, the Wall Street Journal reaches out to be like, hey, we're running a piece on this whole $130,000 thing. Initially, Stormy does not want to say anything because she's signed an NDA, and as she's thinking about it, she's not supposed to say anything, but Keith Davidson insists, she says, I believe, that she has to sign a denial. At this point, her cover is blown and her life falls apart. She goes on Jimmy Kimmel to give the infamous interview where she says she didn't sign another one of the denials that Keith Davidson wrote up for her. She says that of course she knows she did sign it, but she did sign it with a signature different than every other signature of hers because she wanted to hint to Kimmel that she was doing it under duress. Around this time, she decides that if Michael Cohen can talk so publicly, she should be able to too. So she hires Mr. Avenatti, her lawyer, who she then sues in a whole other series of events to try and get the NDA voided. Ultimately, Cohen and Trump decide they will not enforce the NDA, and she wins, I think, $100,000 in legal fees. She also publishes her book called Full Disclosure, and also around this time, Avenatti files a defamation suit against Donald Trump on behalf of Stormy Daniels, but Stormy Daniels says she never wanted the suit filed in the first place because she thought it was just gonna cause more trouble. And you know what? It did. It caused more trouble. In 2021, she speaks to Michael Cohen for the first time. She goes on his podcast and she says that she did this because she wanted to hear him apologize, and he did. And then the prosecution goes over a series of posts that Donald Trump has made, calling her horseface, sleazebag, etc. And then we get to cross-examination. But before we do, a quick reminder that this case overall is about falsified documents. It's not about whether or not Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels had sex. It's not about the circumstances of that sex. It is about whether she was paid by Michael Cohen to keep the aspects of her relationship with Donald Trump secret, and then if Donald Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for those payments while pretending to pay him for legal services. That's all it's about. The paper trail and what was falsified in it. Also, you should note that the cross-examination on this one was really long and really infuriating. And I'm gonna try and sort of hit the points without being too long and infuriating myself. One of the points that the defense is making is that Stormy Daniels is in cahoots, apparently, with the prosecution because she hates Donald Trump. And she's like, look, I do hate Donald Trump. I've never said I didn't, but I'm also telling the truth. They're also very down on her about being motivated by money. I would like to point out that the last witness read a series of quotes from Mr. Trump's books about how one ought to be motivated by money, but apparently it's dirty when Stormy Daniels does it. Also, I think salient here, we've just heard Stormy herself say that 2017, the year before all of this became so public, was the best financial year of her life. And there's a lot of nitpicking of different articles, and it's things like, why did you say that you were at dinner with Mr. Trump if you didn't actually eat dinner? You've talked a lot about the dinner. Did you or did you not have dinner, you liar? The defense talks also, again, circling back to the money of it all, about merch that Stormy Daniels sells, saying that she's trying to profit off of his indictments. And she says, isn't he doing the same thing? And then, and I'm not exactly sure how to say this, but I feel like the defense is making an argument that because Stormy Daniels has consented to having sex as a career, she has essentially consented to every sexual exchange that anyone could ask her to be a part of, and there's no way that she was possibly nervous when she came out of the bathroom and saw Donald Trump on his bed. Mind you, we're talking about a woman who has specifically said during her initial questioning that one of the only reasons she chose Wicked Pictures to work with as her production agency is because they require the use of protection, something that Donald Trump looked right past during their exchange. Stormy also defends herself here. She says that this situation is very different than a set that she's consented to be on. There's a very powerful man, twice her age, standing in front of her, and there's also a bodyguard at the front door. The defense says things to her like, you're making this up as you sit here, right? And she says, no, She isn't. She's telling the truth. They also go through a series of tweets where Stormy Daniels makes fun of Donald Trump and of various Trump defenders who are tweeting at her. And it's a lot of content, but I think essentially the idea is that because she called him an orange turd, it's okay that he called her a horse face. And you know what? Power balance aside, you could debate whether or not that's okay, and it would still have nothing to do with what this case is about. Also, they have this weird line of logic that because she has directed adult films, she's good at fabricating stories about sex and therefore must have made up this entire story. And she's like, no, the sex in those movies, that's real. When they're talking about this, the defense says, you decided you wanted to publicly say that you had had sex with Donald Trump, right? And she says, no, nobody would want to publicly say that. In the money vein, the defense also points out that Stormy Daniels owes Donald Trump north of $500,000 in legal fees. And Stormy has not paid him because the litigation on all of this is still pending. And they're like, you're withholding the money from him, right? Which is so interesting when you consider that we're talking about a man who routinely does not pay his own bills. And then they get to what I actually think is maybe the only relevant part of this questioning. And they say, you didn't speak to Donald Trump in 2016. And she says, no, I didn't. And they say, you were paid by Michael Cohen, right? And she said, no, I was paid by my lawyer. And they say, right, but not Donald Trump. And she says, I was paid by my lawyer. Again, no one is debating that Cohen paid Keith Davidson. We're here to discuss the fact that Donald Trump reimbursed him for those payments and called it compensation for lawyering instead. Then we're back to redirect. The prosecution is back up and they talk about the 2018 NDA case where Stormy hires Avenatti to try and get out of her NDA and says that there was paperwork filed in that case where Trump's lawyers confirmed that he reimbursed Cohen $130,000, which I would say is super relevant. They also address the money of it all, pointing out that it's not wrong for Stormy Daniels to want to make money. We kind of like all want to make money. We have to live in America. And then they ask her about the costs associated with all of this. And she says they've been high. She's had to hire security. She's had to move more than once. She's got a lot of legal bills. But at the end of the day, all you can really wonder is, was Mr. Trump satisfied with the bullying his lawyers did on his behalf? Because they certainly did very little questioning relevant to the actual case.